said, I think many of you know, but this presentation is about my artwork on mental health. So it's a year-long thesis project that I've been working on, but it's really something I've been thinking about for a lot longer and have been kind of working at this intersection of art and health for pretty much my entire Duke career. So it's really exciting to do something kind of at the culmination of my time here and using my interest in neuroscience and art to create something. Before we get started, I do want to say the artwork is about mental health. I don't think that there's anything disturbing or, should be a content warning, but if you do ever feel the need to step out of the Zoom or turn off your video, whatever you need to do, I do want everyone to feel comfortable. And I understand that this is a pretty sensitive topic, especially since we have lost two members of our community recently, and just keeping them in our thoughts and their families. And let me know throughout if there's any like audio or visual issues. Hopefully my Wi-Fi stays strong for this, but never know. Okay, so this is again the introduction to my art show. It's titled Reflect Mental Health Experiences at Duke. And I think the reason I chose this title and this theme is that I really wanted the ending exhibit to be a space where people could reflect. So whether that be on their own experiences, the experiences that they've seen other people having, and just overall be a space where you can look at the artwork and think about how that relates to your experiences, or maybe it doesn't. But to have that be a space. Obviously, this is not the Wellness Center gallery, but and it's not a physical show that I was planning on, but I am still really glad to be able to share this work with you all on a virtual platform. I unfortunately got these flyers printed like 2 days before Duke canceled classes, so now I have like 50 of them, but at least I'm using them for this title slide. So to get started, the overall concept, I'm sure many of you have seen the work already or know about it, but it is centered around mental health experiences at Duke. And I'll go into this a little bit later, but it was important for me to have it be mental health experiences and not mental illnesses or specific diagnoses. And all of the work is pretty heavily based on interviews that I've conducted with students, mental health professionals, staff at Duke over the past year or so. And I've depicted common themes coming out of those interviews. So it's really, I've tried to make a very community-based art project, and obviously still has my own artistic voice and decisions, but it is very much informed by my community. So to start off, I wanted to go through a little bit of my previous work. Like I said, I've been exploring this intersection of health and arts and mental health and neuroscience for pretty much my entire Duke career. And so some of my other works have informed and kind of shaped the way, maybe not directly, but shaped the way that I think about my current project. So the first one is some of the research I've done in Dr. Pearson's lab, who's here today, which was kind of looking at eye tracking research, face perception, implicit judgments, things like that. And it was very much from a quantitative side, which I really liked, seeing and understanding, visual perception, neuroscience, eye tracking, judgments from a more neuroscience and science-heavy perspective. I also completed a collaborative mural project at Duke Children's Hospital in 2018, and that was a really fun project where actually each square is colored in by a different patient at Duke Hospital, and then it combines to create this larger image. So kind of a collaborative, one of my first collaborative projects. These are some documentary photos I did of the Reflections program, which is a program at the National Museum that has art gallery tours for Alzheimer's patients, and I really love this program. I actually continued to stay as a gallery guide after doing this project. And then this is a project I did for my Visual Cultures of Medicine class with Drs. Olson and OJ, who I think are both here. And this was kind of one of my first explorations into creating artwork on mental health. And this piece in particular was kind of a pop-up collage. So the first layer was like a stereotypical word about the condition, and this one was anxiety. And then the second layer was medical information, and then the third third layer, which is not shown, is about, it had like a personal story. So kind of exploring different ways of representing these conditions, how collaborative did I want it to be, what artistic choices would I make? So some of my earlier work helped me inform that. And then I had a few of my drawings, these are all part of the final thesis show, but a few of them were on display earlier this year and last year at the Wellness Center gallery. So half of them in the bottom left picture are my drawings. And then they were also on display earlier this year at the Art of Mental Health exhibit, which was curated by Melissa, who's also here. So those were some great opportunities to show some of the work and then hear feedback from people, just thinking about how people were resonating with it. And it also really shaped the type of exhibit that I hope to have in the future in terms of how I want people to interact with the artwork, what kind of space I want it to be, and how to make it something that people resonate with. So now I'm going to walk through some of my process. My ideas have definitely evolved over the year, and that's largely in part to all the great contributions from my professors, but also interviews, friends. I've had a lot of random inspiration, so some of them I'll show here, like Duke architecture or flowers and things like that that have all come together to inform the final project. So I wanted to share this. This is one of the first kind of brainstorming things I did in Raquel's capstone class. I think she's here too. So she had us write out 100 questions at the beginning of the year. So this is in like August, and 100 questions just related to our project, and very like, you know, writing it out, don't think about it, just fill the page with 100 questions. And this was really useful for me, at least, just because I tried to think about my project from so many different angles and just write out as many questions as came to mind. And there's a few that I wanted to point out here that I thought were interesting, like looking back. Does art have a responsibility to address social issues? How can I amplify marginalized voices? How does art give people a voice? And then the last couple, which I thought were really interesting, is why does it feel like everyone I know has mental health concerns, and yet why is there stigma? So I think some of those questions were really kind of thought-provoking for me, particularly the last pair, which was mental health concerns seemed to be a very universal experience, at least for a lot of the students that I knew, but there was less conversation about it than you would think for such a universal problem, right? So I think that was something that I wanted to explore further, and I think my artwork was very much shaped by some of these thoughts. And then I think another big shift that I had in terms of the way I was thinking about my project was a shift from depicting illnesses, like I was saying earlier, to depicting experiences. And there's a couple of key reasons that I chose to make that decision. One of them was actually taking a class last semester. It was a neuroscience seminar called The History of Mental Health. And it was also cross-listed in history and literature, I believe. And that class was really eye-opening to me because it showed me the impact of social, political, cultural factors on the way that mental illnesses are categorized, viewed, and treated. So, for example, one thing we talked about in the class was how, all the DSM, the manual used to diagnose mental health conditions, how those DSMs have changed so much over time. How conditions like hysteria used to exist for women that were, doing things that were not societally acceptable and then sent to asylums. And so obviously we don't have that as a mental illness today. Who knows what other mental illnesses or how our categories will shift. And obviously that's not to say that, mental illnesses don't exist. They obviously do, but our categories for them will likely change over time, and they clearly have changed quite a bit. So I think I didn't want to depict a very this is bipolar disorder, this is what it looks like, this is a picture of someone that has it. And I didn't want it to be very categorized by that definition or diagnosis. And the other reason I did that, which is a little bit more of a personal, ethical reason, is that I didn't really feel like I had the right to depict all of these diagnosed mental health conditions that maybe I didn't personally have. So the example of bipolar disorder, I don't have that condition. So I didn't feel like I had the right to depict this in my artwork and say this is the experience of bipolar disorder, because obviously that's not, I don't have the authority to say that, and even if I interviewed someone with that, it just didn't feel genuine to me. So I shifted to depicting experiences, which I think are a lot broader definition. Not everyone I interviewed had a mental health condition. I didn't even ask most of them, or it didn't even necessarily come up. But really talking about their experiences as a Duke student and how that affected their mental health. And I think that's something that anyone can relate to, whether they are diagnosed with an official mental health condition or not, or anywhere in between. So this is a very brief, very big picture overview of some of the people that I interviewed for this project. I tried to talk to a wide range of students, you know, Trinity students, Pratt students, female and male identifying, students from all age groups. I also made an effort to talk to mental health professionals and people that worked at both the Wellness Center, the Women's Center, CAPS, as well as athletes, LGBT students, low-income students, first-gen students. And obviously this is not a fully comprehensive picture of, you know, all of Duke, because I clearly only did like 15 interviews. So, and there's going to be a level of bias as well. Like many of these people are people that I knew previously, or they were my friends or things like that. But I do think I got quite a lot of different voices from Duke, and I got to hear a lot of different perspectives, which were really, really helpful for my project. But at the same time, what was interesting is even though I was talking to all these people from different parts of campus and different ages, many of the things that they were saying were similar. And so this was a very a rough idea of my process. So I unfortunately don't have all my sketches here with me. My sketchbook is still stuck in my dorm room. Don't know when I'm going to be getting that, but I did take a few of these pictures. I had them from before, just to show a brief idea of my process. So what I would do is I would do an interview with someone, and then as soon as that interview was over, I would get my sketchbook out and just try to jot down the few things that came to mind. So I had been taking notes and recording the interview, but I wanted a very quick, like, visual sketch of some of the things that they had said. And for some people that was easier than others. Sometimes people would say things that were very like visual, like a cycle or a pyramid or something like that. And so, like this one on the bottom left, they were talking about competition and people acting like you have the hardest life, and like a competition to say like who had the fewest hours of sleep and things like that. So I was thinking about like award ribbons, since those really symbolize like this competition in the sense that you've won something, and so many Duke students come in very accomplished in high school and things like that and probably have tons of these ribbons from different competitions. So I just kind of had that idea in my mind. And then this other one, like social hierarchies, a pyramid. So a very brief sketch, and sometimes I'd include quotes that stood out to me from their interview. So, and then after that, I would just think about the ideas for a little bit, maybe make some more refined sketches, and then ultimately start sketching it on my final paper, my Bristol board. And then I did the ink drawing part with a ballpoint pen, which I got at the Duke store. So no super fancy art materials, but this was generally the process that I went through for thinking about my ideas and trying to bring them together. And then I'd also like to touch on a few other influences, though they may not be directly in my project. They definitely shaped the way that I thought about the project, in the way that I would like to display my project. One of those things was the mental health forum that was in February. That was really great, really great event where there were representatives from CAPS, Do Well, Student Affairs, Duke Reach, and really the whole aim of that was to demystify mental health resources on campus, which I think is really great, because there was a lot of confusion or redundancy and students not knowing like who to go to for this. And they also dispelled a lot of myths that students have, like a 6-session limit on CAPS. They had some interesting stats, like 70 to 75% of Duke students feel connected, but that means about 15%, and 15% in the survey felt like they really didn't belong. So I thought that was interesting. Um, there's about a 30% increase in undergraduates using mental health resources, which I think is really great. They talked about how stigma levels were dropping due to student advocacy and student mindsets. And there's also an increase in students sharing mental health concerns with professors, which I also thought was interesting. So I think this was a really great event that showed me kind of from an administrative and CAPS and health perspective, what were the stats and what were they seeing. And then another one of my big influences, which I think you all can see by looking at the work, is Duke architecture, which I really love. Um, and several iconic Duke architecture parts have been included in my work. This one on the left is actually a drawing I made in my freshman year. And so I was playing with this idea of like the chapel in kind of a ornament or a circle or bubble for the first piece. But then after that, and after some conversations with professors, I tried to shift away from a super Duke heavy look. So obviously, if you go to Duke, you're from Duke, you know exactly what these places are in the other two artworks, and you can recognize exactly where that is. But even if you don't go to Duke, I think that the message of it can still be something that you relate to, like feeling like you have only one path to go down and your options are limited, or just seeing a positive message like you're not alone. And I think that was important for me to create artwork that could also reach a larger audience. Obviously, it's grounded in Duke, like that's where I was, that's where all my interviewees were from. But I did want to create artwork that could go beyond that. And so in some of the later works, you'll probably see like Duke is a little bit less prominent, which is what I tried to do. And then another one of my inspirations for the title photograph that is actually going to become a large scale installation was actually a fairly like unplanned random inspiration. My friends gave me some flowers for my birthday, um, and I made this like makeshift vase on my desk with like a Kleenex box and a cup inside, and these flowers were sitting there for weeks, and I had a pill bottle container on my desk as well. And I was just playing around with this idea, and then I decided to try putting the flowers in the pill bottles to kind of symbolize recovery or growth. That also echoed something one of my interviewees was talking about. And so I just kind of put this together, and it turned into the title and main installation of my work. So it was really kind of a random inspiration, but I think it worked well. Okay, so now I'm going to take us to the online version of the exhibit, and discuss one of my main artistic choices, which is the image inversion. Okay, so this is what the online exhibit looks like. And so it's on my art website, and you can see like the other projects as well. So this kind of starts off with the project statement, my motivation, the interviews, my ideas for the final exhibit. And then each artwork has an inverted version. And so this is an artistic decision that I made, I think in the spring. And for me, it really created an interesting effect for my images. So I think we're all very used to seeing like the black lines on the white background. And inverting that really kind of represented a shift in perspective, which is one of the things that I'm hoping viewers can take away. So kind of seeing things from a different angle. And it also kind of looked like a silver lining, like all the white lines were silver linings, so maybe some positivity in like a darker background. And then another connection that I think was really interesting to me was that these types of images actually resembled x-rays or like medical images, MRIs, things like that, things that I've seen from all my experiences in the sciences. And this kind of had that medical feel to it. And it was kind of an ironic connection because these types of images are actually never used to diagnose mental health conditions. You can't get an MRI for a depression diagnosis. So I think that was an interesting thing. And so these are actually the black background, the inverted versions are going to be the ones that I'll be displaying. But I do like that on the website, they're interactive, so the viewer can choose which version they want to see at that time. So I'll just, I think, walk us through very briefly the artwork in the show. Again, you're all welcome to go to the website and like read through it. But just to give a very quick overview, this is the mental health spotlight. So just giving us an idea of kind of the intro to the show. This one, effortless perfection, is also a common theme from the interviews. This idea of keeping everything together on the surface, but then in reality, you're really struggling and falling apart. Hidden costs, this one is about the financial concerns that come with college and that a lot of students face, particularly those that are from a lower socioeconomic status. Only one path to success. This piece, I alluded to it earlier, but this feeling of you have so many opportunities at the beginning, and then as you get closer to the end of your Duke career, you feel like you have limited options and there's only one way to go. Overloaded, this piece I think is pretty obvious, but about the kind of the overloading of schedules and taking on so many things that you limit your time for self-care. Barriers to success. This is something that I heard from a lot of students, particularly first years and people who work with first years, about how there's so many, this culture of exclusivity and people get rejected from so many things in their first year that it can make them feel like they don't belong and that it's hard to be successful. Proud winner, I've also alluded to this one, but kind of this competition to have the worst self-care at Duke, but I think not just Duke, I think this is quite common in American culture, to be honest, saying you have the fewest hours of sleep, you have the most midterms, the hardest life, and kind of competing for that. This piece, titled Real Diplomas, is kind of a twist on the classic diplomas and showing how you might gain different things from Duke than you anticipated. And this piece is about alcohol culture. So you can see like all the hidden words in the like dripping background that represent drinking culture, but these pieces are actually going to be on coasters in the real show. So I have a picture of those a little further down. So they'll be on the tables. And then prescriptions for Duke, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, like things that Duke can do better and things that we all need more of. Recovery blooms, I've also touched on this one, but the idea that you have different flowers growing out and showing how recovery can look different for everyone. And then you're not alone, so just kind of the summary. And also I think my overall goal with this exhibit is to show people that they are not alone and that there are other people who have these experiences. And I think seeing, these big art pieces on the wall can really help show someone that, maybe I thought I was the only one dealing with this, but that's not true. And then I plan to create an installation of these pill bottle flowers, so hopefully like 100 of them on the table, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in the PowerPoint. And then these are the coasters, so I have these printed out, or made, I guess I ordered them, and they'll be on the tables in the exhibit. And then this is what the Wellness Center gallery space looks like. And so now I thought it would be, after everyone has seen kind of the overview of the exhibit, I wanted to go through just a couple of pieces kind of as a spotlight and show how some of the interview comments have directly shaped those works. So this one, Real Diplomas, I thought would be fun. There's a lot of like hidden Easter eggs in this one. So the anxiety factory. So this is actually a direct term that someone said during the interviews. One of the therapists that I interviewed described Duke as an anxiety factory. And I thought that was a really interesting phrase, and I wanted to use it somewhere. And so I've kind of changed, it's a university diploma, but it's like the course of study required by the anxiety factory, and then the degree of resilience. So while it may have been, a hard environment or a different, a harder place, you've gained something positive out of that. And then the kind of hidden fun messages here are like the signatures. This is like SLG rush, social group rejection, like CAPS therapist, course withdrawal, mindfulness class. So like different things, maybe hard experiences for you have shaped you and made you more resilient coming out of this place. And then the one on the top is actually inspired by one of my interviews with a student athlete who discussed the role of balance in her life and how much organization and commitment and balance you need in your life to balance all of your athletic commitments with all of your academic commitments. And again, has like a signature from NCAA mental health, like your coach. And she was talking about how the NCAA is actually prioritizing athlete mental health a lot more these days. And then like the seal here has D1 athlete. So some of them just have like fun hidden things. I think the one with the money hidden costs has some of those too. But I thought it would be interesting to include a few smaller things like that. And then this one is barriers to success, which I just talked about, but really focusing on this culture of exclusivity, club rejection, SLG rejection, internship rejections right as soon as Duke students get here. And I chose this view. I tried to kind of minimize the chapel effect, but kind of showing how you're trying to get to the end of the road. You're trying to reach this like success at the end of Duke. But there's all these roadblocks in the way. And there's also this view is important to me, and I think a lot of Duke students can relate. But the first time you come to Duke and you like go down Chapel Drive and you're like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. Like, I can't wait to go here. I can't believe I'm here. This is so exciting. And like that whole view really had an impact on me. So I wanted to include that. So moving to the future, I am hoping to have a physical exhibit of this work, hopefully in the fall, but maybe would have to be later than that. And create an immersive therapy waiting room type of environment. And so I want to have a few kind of chairs and have kind of the feel of a waiting room a little bit. And I think that would work well because it's going to be in the wellness center right next door to the pharmacy and in the same building as CAPS and student health. And then in addition to that, I'll have this large installation of the pill bottle flowers, probably artificial flowers, but I'll figure that out. And then these coasters, as well as like a book of my artwork. But for now, we have the online exhibit, so I definitely recommend everyone to check it out after this if they'd like to read more of the descriptions. And then just at the end, I wanted to share this. This is my idea for some of the pill bottle labels. So I'm planning to make my own labels for all of these. If you've had me in a group me, like annoyingly asking people to keep all their pill bottle containers for the past few months, this is why. I'm going to have these different like medications. Like this one is resilience, but it could be like tolerance, like strength, I don't know. And then they're all kind of these hidden messages. I think this number is like the National Suicide Hotline and some of these other different things. This was the date of the original exhibit. And then this QR code, if you scan it, actually goes to my art website. So I was gonna have some fun, like hidden things in there, and I'm still hoping to have this installation because it just wasn't possible to do that virtually, or I didn't even have any of the materials with me, but I do want to create that in the future. And then to wrap up, I want to acknowledge all the people that have helped with this project. It would not have been possible without you all, particularly all the interviewees, and then all of my professors from the arts department, Pedro Lash, Mark Olson, Raquel Sabatea de Prada, and Bill Seaman, who were both my committee members and then capstone professors. I really appreciate all your feedback along the way and how you've shaped this project. And I'm also grateful to the support of the Duke Wellness Center for offering this space, and for Duke University for providing creative arts grants that helped fund this project. All right, so I'd love to open it up for questions.
I just wanted to say that a couple of things. I love the overall idea of mental health experiences and the universal nature of that, and how that's something that really everyone hopefully can be thinking about and relating to, and just hopefully continuing to incorporate into their daily living. And the other thing is just the layers upon layers of thoughtfulness and irony and detail, and it's just so exceptionally thought provoking. I just really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful.
Sujal, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wasn't sure if my audio was working. I have like well, first before I like state the question, I'd like you know how much I look up to you and like this work is like so great. I saw like the first installation I think last spring when you invited me to come over, and I really like all the growth and the progression in which you took it in, and I think it's amazing, and it could never have been more relevant in a time like now. Um, so I guess my question with that would be, I know this is not necessarily the essence of your project, but if you would have to make some recommendations, whether it be to the universities or to society in general, based on what you found in your interviews, what would it be?
Oh, thank you, Allie. Um, I think what I've heard a lot of is that I think mental health issues, or at least challenges, are something that everyone experiences. And I think that could be something that really should be normalized a little more. I do think that it's improving. I've heard from almost every student who I talk to who's been there for multiple years at Duke that things have improved, as well as CAPS therapists have said, there's an increase in utilization, but there still are populations that are not really using those resources. And I think it's a matter of making those more accessible to people, but also letting people know that it's not a problem if you're going to CAPS, for example. I've had a lot of people in interviews say things like, "Oh, like I didn't realize my mental health like was a problem until it was like an emergency situation." And so just kind of shifting your mindset about mental health into something that is something that you should always work to maintain, and not something that you should be like rescuing in a crisis. So just like your physical health, like you always want to eat good foods, or like, stay active and things like that. And mental health is no different. So I think just kind of shifting the way that people or the university views mental health as something that should be maintained and kept up, as opposed to like rescued, would be a good thing. I'm I'm going to read a couple of questions from the chat that are popping in. Um, have I ever been a gardener, have connections to the Duke farm? I actually don't. I'm not a super big gardener, but I do have a succulent plant that I've kept alive since freshman year. So that is my big accomplishment. Shout out to my roommate for keeping it alive in summer. But I think that the whole plant analogy has been a really good one, and I think it's kind of complemented some of the other imagery in the show really well, and I would love to look into that more. Um, and then there's a question about taking a predominantly representational approach, even with layers of meaning. Any thoughts on the long history of using abstraction to depict mental states? I think that's a really cool question. I think, at least for me, the maybe the difference there is the depiction of mental illnesses versus mental health experiences. And maybe to depict a certain mental illness, it's easier to do so in an abstract way. Though I'm not sure, of course, this is so subjective and dependent on each artist's perspective, as well as the topic that they're dealing with. But I think abstraction can be a really great way to go about it, especially if you need to feel things with like colors or textures and things like that that you can't really capture in a representational way. But at the same time, I really appreciated using a representational approach, or at least a little bit more so, because I thought it made the artwork a little bit more grounded and relatable, particularly with including the Duke architecture, because it kind of showed people that like this is happening here. And having the archways or having the chapel and things like that really kind of centered the work in the place that it was based on. And I think that might have been a little bit hard. It might have been a little harder for people to relate to things that were extremely abstract. And of course, my audience is trying to be everyone at Duke, not just the artistic community that maybe would recognize or relate to an abstracted work more. But I'm trying to reach all students, and sometimes a representational approach is better. Okay, I have a question from Jessica. Um, So she says, I think you're right. Mental health care is steadily improving on Duke's campus, but this certainly isn't true on all campuses. Any plans to show this work at other colleges or universities? I think that's a great idea. I actually haven't thought about that very much, but I am looking into potentially publishing it as like a graphic medicine piece somewhere, but still looking into the possibilities of that. But that's a great suggestion. I have another question from Lolita. Are there ways that this work can be disseminated to incoming first year students? I think that's a great idea. I was actually thinking about, I think someone had also mentioned this to me as it being some sort of like resource, or at least some sort of thing that many people can have access to. And I think maybe partnering with like the FAC board or other people involved in student programming would be a good way to do that. Um, so that's a great suggestion.
So I just want to say, to those of you that don't know me, I've been Sujal's roommate for all of Duke, so it's been really inspiring to see not only this project but all of her projects kind of come together in the dorm. Get to see, I like kind of get a little insight into her first thoughts, and it's really inspiring to see how she takes kind of inspiration from all of her professors, but also her friends and her own experiences and the art we see around campus. So that's been like something that's really enlighten my Duke experience. And I think one thing Sujal and I were talking about at the end of the semester was maybe some of the sounds and like music, or maybe she might incorporate into the immersive exhibit. So Sujal, have you thought any more about like if there's going to be a sound element to like maybe like a waiting room elevator music type thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know we talked about this before spring break. Um, for those of you who don't know Catherine, she is a star musician and singer. So this is why I was asking her about this. She's on like a cappella groups. And I actually really do want to include music. I think that will create more of an immersive environment and kind of add an additional layer on top of the artwork and all the tactile elements. And so I'm thinking of having some sort of like calming music, like something that you would expect to see in a therapy waiting room or even like a mindfulness like activity, something related to that that kind of fits in with the whole vibe of the wellness center. But would love to hear your suggestions. All right, I'm going to touch on a couple of questions. Speaking from the high school perspective, sharing this presentation with high school counseling would also be a great thing to do. I think that ties in with the sharing with other colleges. I would love to look into that. Okay, my interest. Oh, okay, from Dr. Lash. Thank you for being here, first of all. And he's asking how I plan to continue to integrate my interest in science, well-being, and art post-graduation. So next year I'm planning to do arts nonprofit work in Austin. So it's particularly at a nonprofit that is an art studio that works with people with disabilities. So I'm really excited to continue working at this intersection. And then after that, I'm interested in medicine, particularly medical education, or just ways to bring in the arts into healthcare, whether that be through medical education, art therapy, research. I'm just really interested in this intersection and hope to continue it in the future. Okay, the next question from Dr. OJ. Have I thought about a book, more overtly narrative version of this work? Yes, I am planning to have a book in the final exhibit, which has kind of all of this work in a very more like standard format. But right now the book is pretty much what's on the website, just in a book form. Though I'd love to hear your suggestions if you have other ideas for how to make that book more of like an overtly narrative version, because I'm definitely open to that. Okay, the next question, as a volunteer for Arts for Life, yay, Arts for Life. What about adding an interactive project to your waiting room? That's a really cool idea. I would have to think about that a little bit more, but I'm writing that down. I think it would just depend on some of the logistics of the show, like how would that interactive project just be something there 24/7? Would it be only for the opening? How many people could that accommodate? Would that change the number of people that could view the show? So I think mainly thinking about the space limitation of the Wellness Center gallery and things like that. Wesley's question. Thank you for being here, Wesley. So thinking about how I might bring my own creative practice into my work as a physician. Yes, so that's something I've been thinking about a lot, and something that's really an interest for me. So I think the arts for me have been a great way to empathize and communicate with people overall, whether that be people who are suffering from illness or not. And I think that's something that I'd like to continue. And also, I think that the role of art in medicine has so much more potential than what it is currently doing. And so, whether that be, exploring different types of art as just a distraction for patients. So many times that can just help their mental well being, which in turn can complement their physical well being. And there's also so many different types of ways that art projects can be done with patients. There's also just like art museum collaboration. There's so many different avenues that this can go, but I think that what the arts have really given me is an avenue to empathize and communicate and listen to people that are different from me. And I think those skills are so applicable, not only in medicine, but in almost any other field. And so that I think that training, even if that's something that aspiring physicians can learn, or anyone in any profession can learn to connect with people better through the arts, I think that would be a win for everyone.
What piece of advice would you give to first years coming into Duke after doing all of your research and seeing all of these things that are happening on campus?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the issues that I heard for first year students, which was echoed in one of my pieces, is just this idea of the culture of exclusivity, and also this idea of like overloading yourself. And so I think both of those are things that you should really watch for and try to avoid. So a culture of exclusivity, obviously you can't do anything if an organization rejects you, but you can be very open to other opportunities and try to not focus and fixate on one thing. Maybe that doesn't work out, but Duke has so many other things. And so really open your mind to trying new things, and don't be so weighed down by these different groups and exclusivity. And also really try to take time for yourself and self-care. I think at least for me as a first year, it was kind of intimidating coming into Duke because everyone was probably like the top student at their high school. And then to come into a school where everybody is the top student from their high school can be really intimidating and scary. And trying to carve out your own path when everyone seems to be doing so much better than you can be hard. So I think like try to limit your involvements, don't overschedule yourself, and try to keep time for yourself, and try to avoid getting caught up in like the pressure and the rat race that you might feel, and you might feel like you're not doing enough, but you definitely are. And just being yourself and taking care of yourself is also enough. So I know I recently talked to a first year student about like advice for Duke, and so that was one of the things I told her.